for one of those killings to not be like a literal killing, to be a metaphorical killing. So if we're going to dismiss the other one, by that very nature, we have to put it up in the air that the other one cannot be real. We can't just pick and choose. So the cinematography and the stylistic choices have told us that, yes, it is possible for this all to be a dream. Is that likely? No, because here's the problem. There's only one supporting fact for that. There's only one supporting issue for that. Like, when forming a theory, you should always have it not just be something that could happen, and it's usually that way, right? It's usually like, no, but you can't be. It's like a technicality that people get it by. It is not like this this wide ranging like wealth of knowledge and sources that are going towards it. Like, one supports other. Now, as Omar is using, and Omar, like I said,
welcome to Top Shelf Fandom. I'm your host, Justin Thomas, and today we're going to be taking a look at the biggest question going across all of the Vikings fandom. Is Bjorn Lothbrok dead? The evidence for, the evidence against, and everything in between, with special guest King McKay. So what makes the Bjorn situation so unique? Well, I wouldn't say it's unique in the sense of overall fandom, but it's definitely unique for this time. It's unique in what's happening in the fandom right now, or lack of what's happening, and it plays into it when you have 6 months you have to burn. So there is the temptation by the showrunners and writers to put a cliffhanger in which we will speak about the proper formatting of cliffhangers, or at least the ideal formatting of them and where this falls in, to maybe lead the audience a little bit more than you should. This leads to a lot of assumptions, presumptions, hyperbolic insinuations, and claims. As far as the fandom goes, it's always my intent to just encourage people to enjoy these stories as much as possible. Whether that means they're indulging in a theory that really makes no sense, it doesn't really matter to me. I draw the line when I see people telling other people that they're absolutely incorrect and that this theory is wrong because of, let's just say, a hypothetical example of somebody looked up what happened to the real Bjorn in history and tends to then use historical context for a show that at the very base is not historically accurate, not adhering to the sagas nor the Saxon accounts. But nonetheless, if history can tell you something at this time, then why not go ahead and use what happens in history to prove what will happen in a show that rarely, if ever, follows history? Nonetheless, I do think it's about the discourse and not presenting yours as the only one, because it rarely stands on substance, and we're going to put these up to the test here, and we're going to go through it to prove that not only can you have your theory and have fun with it too, but if you are interested in theory craft, I think you will enjoy this video. It is going to be helpful to show you all the tricks of the trade, especially when it comes from content creators like myself, who has dealt with a plethora of difficult situations, especially with dealing with shows like Westworld, in which you never know what to believe from the showrunners or even what you're seeing on television, and getting help from one of the best in the Vikings business, King McKay, as well as one of our comet berserkers, Omar Ragnarsson, that'll be providing us information with what they think and how they're looking at this. And we can go step by step to come to a conclusion that's not only more likely to be accurate, but really what it comes down to is it's actually an experience within this fandom of learning about aspects of the story, the historical background in which this series plays off of, to the way in which story is crafted, to the way in which this story particularly is crafted, way in which the business works, meaning how these interviews are handled, how these behind the scenes photos get leaked, where do they come from, what do you do with out of context pictures, how do you put them into context, how do you take a photo that supposedly comes from behind the scenes and turn it into proof of something, can you take a photo that comes from behind the scenes and turn it into proof of something? And what's the best way of at least getting to the point where you can say, hey, this theory might not be 100% right, but it's 100% based in solid logic. We're going to get you there. So first things first, let's just break this down into 3 possibilities. And we have a poll on Twitter that's actually got people voting on it as we speak. We'll put up those stats as the video goes on. There's 3 general takes on what's going on with Bjorn. First is Bjorn is alive, and it is due to this just being a dream, meaning what we saw on screen was not actually what was happening. It was a dream. Bjorn is still alive. We will start the next episode with this reveal. The second, Bjorn is alive, but he did get wounded in the way in which we saw, but he will survive this wound. In the third, Bjorn succumbs to the wound in which we see him take in 6A, and he is dead. So essentially what we're dealing with is what we saw happened either really happened, and he's alive, or he's dead, or we didn't see what really happened. So starting at the first theory, starting at step 1 here, we are going to look at, is there any credence to the idea that what we saw isn't what we should believe? And to do that, I can think of no better than the king of the Vikings fandom, King McKay himself. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here, and take it away, my friend.
Thanks, Thomas. It was clear right after the episode aired that a huge amount of the fanbase wasn't convinced Bjorn was killed at all, which you would think would be quite strange considering we saw Bjorn get skewered right through by Ivar on screen. However, when we look back through the episode, we actually see Vikings employing a large variety of techniques to undermine our ability to trust what we're seeing on screen as being real. Now, this wasn't the first season that we've seen Vikings employ illusionary scenery and artsy symbolism to represent what was happening in the battle, but this time we got fully disembodied dialogue scenes between Ivar and Bjorn that didn't happen at all. So having several scenes throughout the battle already be visions, dreams, not real in some way, believing that we can't trust 100% what we see in those other scenes is not that far off. On top of that, we know that Bjorn is a major character who's been around right from the beginning and is a huge fan favourite, and in this half season we've already had a comparable character death with Lagertha, and the grandiose that went into that, the funeral, the closure, the build up was so much more intense and clearly built up for all the audience to see that it makes Bjorn's death coming out of nowhere, being stabbed by Ivar, really feel cheap and not conclusive at all. And they even doubled down on making sure we didn't get any closure by completely brushing past his death afterwards and going straight to the celebrations of Oleg, Ivar and the Rus after their victory. We don't get to see where Bjorn's body goes, the reaction of his allies and friends, or even really Ivar outside of the dream state. We as the audience get the overwhelming sense that Vikings is holding Bjorn's fate, the conclusion of the battle, as a cliffhanger to draw us over to part B. Vikings has tried their very best to make sure we could not trust our own eyes and to leave open that distinct possibility that he lives. However, I'm sure Thomas and Omar will be able to clue you in on some of the really interesting ways the fandom is trying to find out the truth despite Vikings' best attempts to throw us off.
Just as King mentioned, Vikings gives us plenty of reasons to believe what we saw is in fact questionable at the very least. This isn't the first time, or probably the last time, Vikings as a series will embrace this stylistic form of cinematography in which they utilize so well. It's important to note that when King was going over his reasons for why it's not out of the question for us to question what we see, is he's not just relying on one road to get there. Meaning, he's not just relying on the lack of continuity within the sequence of scenes, meaning the beach scenes, then the battle scene, giving us a dual death scene, both mirroring each other almost like the metaphorical meeting the literal death. Seems like he dies in a dream state, almost metaphorically, as well as in the literal sense on the battlefield. But what's really important to take note of is he's not just stopping there. He's also talking about story points. Not where he wants the story to go, but yes, how he feels the story has went, and how it really has been all about Lagertha's death, and it does seem like this pacing is a little bit off, and they definitely withheld all of your staples, everything that you get when you kill off a character, meaning the character was never seen buried, there is nothing shown after. There's no reason to really believe that Bjorn is dead, per se, but there's really no reason to believe that he's going to be doing all that well, in my opinion at least. But it's wonderful to hear somebody use story points along with continuity, along with stylistic cinematic choices, continuity of story, character arc in story arc, as well as keeping the story within its context and not letting the story just be what you want it to be. So using that logic and using the context of what the story has done so far, and briefly, if you will, how cliffhangers in theory should work. It's always a sign of a good cliffhanger if it leaves the audience wondering about the consequences of an action, not the action itself. You should be asking what happens now that an action has taken place, not has that action taken place. Really bad example of a cliffhanger, but a really great example for this is what some consider to be the death of The Walking Dead. The arrival of the infamous Negan at the season finale, and The Walking Dead knows they're about to go on at least a 6 to 8 month break. Instead of showing who they kill and leaving the audience to ponder what the story is going to be like now that those people are no longer in it, meaning the consequences of action, they leave it at the action. We see that he commits an action, but we don't see who he commits it to. He leaves it ambiguous. This is usually a sure sign of a weak story, meaning they don't trust that they have enough going forward, meaning it's all about shock. It's who died and oh my god, Let's ponder that rather than how does this change the characters still existing within your story's journey. Now, this all might sound like a whole bunch of just minutia or just little nuances to story that don't really matter, but I have to remind you that if you are looking to craft theories or engage in fandom discussions in which you're posing theories or denying others' theories, it's always important to know that story crafting means that you have to craft story, meaning you have to know how it's made. Story might be one of the rare occurrences in which the consumer actively engages with it and assumes that we have an understanding of how it's made. You wouldn't fly in an airplane and go and tell Boeing how their engines should be constructed. No, you know that you're a consumer, you know that you fly, maybe you fly even every day, maybe once a week, maybe you fly a plane yourself. Just like driving a car doesn't teach you how to be a mechanic, watching a story doesn't teach you how to story craft. But there are little nuances to it that actually make watching it a lot more fun, and according to this poll, most of you are theory crafters, so having a few of these tools on your belt wouldn't necessarily hurt. In a really simple way, without taking any screenwriting courses or reading any books, to just pick up on little aspects like this can be as easy as just watching your regular network TV. Every time a network television series takes a commercial break, they have a mini cliffhanger. Police, procedural, drama, or basic NBC or ABC show. Nothing too deep thinking, just a fun show to watch, say like Blue Bloods. Pay attention to when they go to commercial. Maybe they have somebody in custody that they think is guilty of the crime. They're waiting on DNA to come back or some sort of a test result. Well, before the commercial break is the time to pop that out. Now, you'll know if the episode has a strong story thread, per se, if the officer will open up the envelope and give you the result, whatever it may be. Then you go to commercial break, come back, and deal with the consequences of that. Lesser story, we'll leave it at the opening of the envelope in a shocked look, leaving you to ponder what happened, not what's going to happen because of it. Now, I'm not saying Vikings completely did this. In all fairness, as Keen pointed out, they haven't given us the staples of a death.
Don't die stupidly. Not going to die.
They've given us, yes, a huge hole through his stomach, and we'll get to the validity of the medical here in a moment. But nonetheless, we have seen no casket. We've seen nobody put in the ground. Within the context of the story, it would be probably the most egregious thing for him to live forever after this. But come on.
Fine ones for playing dead, pretending to run away. Perhaps the Saxons are the same. But no man ever ran away with his entrails hanging down to his knees or his head cut off. That's just a fact of life.
Let's look at Paris. That's 2 bolts to his chest through a lung, falling about 20 feet. Rollo has been trampled by horses and pretty much beat to death multiple times. There's been a lot of pretty severe injuries here. We don't want to pull out and start playing medical doctor on this.
I'm fucking deformed! Fuck you! Fuck you! I'm fucking dying here! I'm fucking dying!
Always stick to context. Context is king. That will always save you when trying to decipher what's going on within a story and what's not going on. Again, you want the roads that lead you there. Multiple roads, not just one road that kind of justifies and vindicates your theory. You want multiple roads that get there. Multiple signs, multiple reasons for believing what you believe, especially, and most importantly, not believing because you simply want to. We see a lot of people hedging this on historical events, our historical garb. Everything from Bjorn was maybe wearing in a leaked picture a Swedish garb. Our Bjorn and Harold can't die because of their respective histories. Well, again, you can't just pull from the history box when it's convenient. You have to stay within the context of the story. What has been exhibited so far? It's actually a lot easier than doing all of these other things. It's just a lot of times we kind of are tempted to go diving in the history books, are diving into what somebody's wearing when, first off, they don't wear historically accurate garb. I'm not downing on the series, I'm just saying it's a fact they do not. And also, they don't depict history verbatim. And if you're going to say history, which history are you speaking of? The Norse sagas, which were spoken word and to interpreted them for themselves, and then they were again rewritten in the 17 to 1800s. So which version are you picking of these sagas? Number 2, are you going by Saxon accounts? If you're going by history, are you going by the Irish monks, in which have many accounts? It's kind of in a catch-22 no matter how you go about it. Same goes with the medical. It's not fair to go and say, hey, in real life, this is what would happen to Bjorn. Yes, the show should definitely try to keep it within reason, but we really can only go off of what the show has told us. Let's kind of really step back and just have some fun here. The seer walks around like he's the mailman in this series, and that's fine. That's a little bit of 100 Years in Solitude. That's that 100 Years of Solitude that Michael Hirst loves so much shining through, this magical realism. You know, we have a seer. Might as well just be the mailman there. Nobody speaks up about it. Nobody finds that odd. It's just there. You know, this is a fantastical story, and it's awesome. It doesn't make it less of a story. It's a wonderful journey in which we're all on. So we have to embrace it for what it is and not act like it's a biopic or a historical depiction or an adaptation of the sagas when it's not. We all know it's not. We love to complain about it. So we can't pick and choose. There's really no strong argument for Bjorn being absolutely dead or being absolutely alive. There's also, in my opinion, no strong argument for this absolutely being a dream, but there's reason to believe that Michael Hirst has something planned because of what's been laid out with the cliffhangers, because of the timing of the death in which Keen has brought up, because of all these factors that are coming together. Now, is it possible he drops the ball? Absolutely. Was I happy about this at first? No, I was not. But I had to sit back and remind myself that good story gives me what I want in an unexpected way. Meaning, it gives you what you want, but not in the way you think you want it. Yes, is Bjorn most likely going to die from these wounds, in my opinion? Yes, but probably not right away. Also, let's look at the story. What has been introduced to us as possibilities for Bjorn? Lagertha was in limbo for at least 3 episodes last season. It's very possible, and with the very words that are spoken by Alexander himself and Michael Hirst, to be fair, these interviews, which are kind of being used by both sides, meaning that are being used as proof for Bjorn being dead and Bjorn being alive, ironically. Another sign that intelligence doesn't make you smarter, it just makes you be able to manipulate facts easier. These interviews, in all fairness, have been fairly honest as far as I can tell. Now, I do want to stress that, again, we cannot use what's said in an interview as fact for what's happening in story, because it's not really taboo in this industry to lie in interviews. I have a whole list as a content creator of times when I was fooled, but we have to look at the vernacular that's used, the verbiage of both interviews. They both did come off as honest for what it's worth, and they use words like Bjorn will be coming back in some form. These are staples for you're going to see somebody again, but maybe not in a physical sense, or at least within the story, of course. This all leads us to believe that he most likely will die from these wounds, and that's where you get, yes, my cheat and my in-between on where I fall for this. I don't fall that it's a dream. I think that there's dream-like aspects of this, but also, I don't think he's going to live a long life after this wound. I think they are going to have him pass. Now, whether the acts that he commits are in the physical form or in this limbo state, you have to look at the context of the story and just embrace these aspects that are just so wonderfully entertaining and wonderfully interesting and complex. When Jon Snow died, it wasn't, oh my god, he's dead now, what happens? It's resurrection on the table. Will he be resurrected? And then they even flipped it with the Battle of the Bastards. He has not to be resurrected if he was killed in battle. He was denied this. So they actually turned him dying, this is when the show was still pretty decent, into a risk because he could be resurrected. It's genius. Not everything is equal across the board, and it's a very fascinating way to put stakes. So what are the stakes for Bjorn? I'm going to end it with this. Every character has what's referred to as wants and needs. What a character wants is what they overtly state. What they need is something they don't know usually. It's subconscious. And Alexander has voiced this in his interview, that what he needs is to repair the relationship with his children. Can he do that in an episode? I don't know, but that's what really lends me to believe that he's at the end of his journey, because they have done some groundwork to kind of repair that.
I brought these warriors to help you.
And you are?
I'm just... Father.
I always knew in my heart that I would see you again. but I never guessed that it would be inside.
What Bjorn wanted was to go to the Mediterranean and do all these great things. I do believe the show fell a little bit flat on that, but nonetheless, on paper, it looks like he did do his journey, his conquest. What he now needs is to be with his family and to be a better man. And he can only really do that by admitting his faults and coming to terms with those. So when you're looking at where a character's at, it's important to look at the story arc as well as their character arc. Bjorn is at that place where it is time for him to go. It might not feel like it and we might not want it, but that's kind of life, and good story does imitate life. What he wants is really a moot point at this time. His leaving services other characters, such as Ivar, adds another layer to him, shows that there's stakes where, let's remember, he's not the only one at the end of his road. In my opinion, by episode 3 or 4, we're looking at anybody could go. When Ivar defeats Bjorn, whether Bjorn was definitively defeated in the last episode or he passes out from blood loss after strapping on a horse and physically riding to some battle, or he spends this time in this limbo state, in this spiritual state, reconciling himself and his family. Something Ragnar didn't quite do, making him maybe greater than Ragnar.
Ha! I do not need to ask if you have been fed well. You have grown so tall. When this is over, we shall have many stories to tell.
You and I, Father, are bound both by ties of memory and blood.
It seems your mother and I have produced a son that is both strong and wise.
And if my sister had lived, she would have been the same.
Yes. And you're right to carry her memory, as do I.
For a long time, Father, I feel I've carried nothing else but memories. But now, here in this place, with you and with my mother, I feel reborn, as if I have a life to live.
Far too long.
What's going on, everybody? Justin Thomas here. Make sure to subscribe and support creativity by becoming a Patreon. But if you want to catch the rest of the conversation, yes, believe it or not, there's a good hour and a half more with me and Mackenzie L. Burns, Johnny B. Crazy from House of the Conqueror, and we have a in-depth discussion about Season 6 finale episode, as well as the season as a whole and the series as a whole, as well as setting some parameters for theory crafting, and we go over Omar's plan. Yes, we didn't forget about you, Omar. It just got a little bit long here, so make sure to support, subscribe, and check out the video podcast. I hope to see you guys soon.